What an entrance. What an entrance Jesus chose. Entering into the gates of Jerusalem. We begin with these words. As he approached Bethphage and Bethany at the hill called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it here. And if anyone asks you why you are untying it, say the Lord needs it." Jesus is making a calculated, intentional entrance. And the villages on the outskirts of Jerusalem, he picks up a colt of a donkey. And a donkey itself is full of symbolism. A donkey is a symbol of peace. And anyone who approaches the gates upon a donkey is understood to be approaching with peace. Contrast this to the way in which Caesar and Caesar's legions entered the gates of a city. They came upon a horse. And when you saw a horse approaching, you thought two things. The person is either coming in war, or they are coming as a conqueror, coming with the news that they have already conquered the city. But here's Jesus. Planning ahead and waiting for him is not just any donkey, but the foal, the colt of a donkey. We can imagine people seeing Jesus approaching the gates of Jerusalem, surrounded by his disciples, praising his name. And there he is, the Master. There he is, the Messiah, the awaited one. And here he comes upon a small donkey, almost comical, his feet dragging on the ground. The colt barely able to withstand his weight. This counter-cultural Jesus, coming almost as a court jester, poking fun perhaps at the Caesars of the world who live with such might and such power and whom the world trembles before, and offering a contrast to the temple priest who comes with an ornate accompaniment. But here comes Jesus, the anointed one of God, coming on an animal of peace, coming as a vulnerable one, offering an alternative way of living and being in the world. And we think about this in our presidential debates right now, which is built around ego so much. And here comes Jesus, this vulnerable one, in profound humility, offering the path of greatness before God is in humility and servanthood towards others. Can you imagine what Caiaphas, the temple priest, thought, and what Pilate, the Roman governor, thought with this jester, this Jesus, approaching their gates? The passage that often accompanies the gospel reading on Palm Sunday is Psalm 118, because it speaks of the very essence of Jesus' ministry. Give thanks to the Lord, for God is good. God's steadfast love endures forever. Let Israel say, God's steadfast love endures forever. Let the house of Aaron say, God's steadfast love endures forever. Let those who fear the Lord say, God's steadfast love endures forever. This passage is coupled with the gospel reading because Jesus is the embodiment of God's steadfast love. We see this again and again in how he lived and how he taught and how he included people, particularly the outcast. God's steadfast love endures forever. The Psalms were written in the Hebrew language, and the Hebrew word for steadfast love is equated with the womb. the womb which nurtures and sustains life. The disciples are proclaiming that God's steadfast love, God's womb-like love, God's nurturing and compassionate love comes not in the form of a Caesar, not in the form of a mighty army, but comes in the form of this loving, compassionate, nurturing Jesus. The Greeks had a concept, the Greek culture of Jesus' time had the concept of gods being a God that was up in the sky, removed, or God who was a judge. And here was this steadfast love coming into their presence. Some people think of God as a big clockmaker in the sky who winds up the world and then it's hands off until the world winds down. Some people think of God as the big finger shaker in the sky who is there to judge and condemn. What is your concept of God? I write a weekly blog with my friend Joe. I reconnected with Joe at my high school reunion a couple of years ago. And Joe is an atheist. And Joe suggested about a month ago, he said, how about if you and I write a weekly blog? And he suggested this title, The Heretic and the Holy Man. And he said, let's just have a kind of respectful conversation about the nature of God. Now, Joe grew up in a Christian church. But he grew up with the concept of God as the big finger shaker, as the big guilt tripper in the sky. And Joe doesn't want anything to do with that concept of God, so he's walked away from God, from a relationship with God, completely. I think many people in our increasingly unchurched culture have moved away from God because God is portrayed in these stereotypical ways, as God is detached, having nothing to do with our lives, no relevance. When we're wounded and broken and grieving, that God is absent. Some people think of God that way. Or others see God as the one who comes to judge and condemn. And if that were my understanding, I wouldn't want anything to do with God either. But Jesus comes to offer an alternative message. God's steadfast love, God's womb-like, nurturing love is forever, for our life, and for eternity. What is your concept of God? What is my concept of God? What was the concept of the Messiah of Jesus' time? A conquering king throwing off the yoke of Rome. And Jesus came upon a donkey of peace, a colt of a donkey, to say that I am going to be more than you ever expected and more than you can possibly imagine. I am going to surround you and envelop you and lift you up as if you are floating in your mother's womb. Is that amazing? Is that incredible? Throughout this Lenten season, people have stopped in before worship, after worship, during the week, and they've taken a shard of pottery. And on the pottery, they've written an area of brokenness in their life. And a couple of these are mine. And some of them are yours. One person has written healing for a broken relationship. Another has written opening our hearts to the homeless. Someone has lifted up a prayer for a friend with cancer. Another who is waiting for a kidney. Another one who is wrestling with depression. Another person writes about a health concern for a loved one. And another shard of poetry just has one word, grief. The cross in our Christian tradition is a symbol of reconciliation, the symbol of atonement. The teaching that no matter what happens in our life, no matter what brokenness we carry, wounds we carry, or worries we carry for ourselves or for the world, that God's steadfast love endures forever. That the compassion and the womb-like nurture of our Creator surrounds us and envelops us and even buoys us as if we are floating on a pond on a warm summer day at Chabaco Lake, just floating in the water. God's grace and God's love and God's mercy just buoys us up, and all we need to do is rest and float. Do we believe that to be true? God's steadfast love endures forever. This alternative way of being in the world. And we as God's representatives are called to bring healing and hope through how we live our lives and how we embrace and include one another and how we too forgive those who have wronged us. There's a jar of water over to my right, and in it are stones. And there's a basket of stones from Dane Street Beach. And throughout this Lenten season, people have been coming up, and I know I've dropped a few in that water. The stones represent what we carry and we can't let go of on our own. Old resentments, old pain, the breach of trust, old hurts, anger. That which we carry but we can't let go of on our own. And people come up, as have I, and we say a silent prayer. And we ask God to release us of those weights we carry, those resentments we carry, those hurts we carry, and we release it in the water, which is a symbol of God's grace, praying that the God of steadfast love will bring healing and hope and blessing to us. What is your concept of God? What is my concept of God? It's not a God up in the sky. It's not a God who judges and condemns. It's a God of steadfast love who meets us and walks with us and forgives us. This is the Jesus who entered the gates of Jerusalem, who confounded the imaginations of the Caesars and the Caiaphases of the time and the temple priests and the governor of Rome. He came with an alternative message of being and welcoming. Do we believe that message is for us as well? Ernest Hemingway, in one of his books, tells this story. There was a father who was estranged from his son Paco. They hadn't spoken for many, many years. One day it was just too much of a weight for that father to carry. So he put an ad in the Madrid newspaper. And he said, "Paco, meet me on Tuesday at noon in front of the Hotel Montana. All is forgiven. Love, Papa." All is forgiven. Love, Papa. On Tuesday, the father goes in front of the Hotel Montana. And there in front of the hotel are 800 men, all named Paco, all waiting to receive a blessing from their father. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for from God? What are you longing for? What freedom, what liberation are you longing to receive? Philip Yancey says, there's nothing we can do to make God love us more. And there's nothing we can do to make God love us less. That the very nature of our Creator is to cherish us and to receive us and to bless us. God's steadfast love endures forever. This is the good news. Thanks be to God as we await the promise, the fulfillment of that promise on Easter. And may God's people say,